November the 2nd, 1987 taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie. We are so excited to bring you this history segment, and this is history taping number 54. And we have as our guest today the Smith family. And we're so pleased to bring to you, first of all, Mattie Smith, the matriarch of the Smith family. Welcome back to the show, Mattie.
Thank you.
Wonderful. We're glad to have you with us. And Sherry Smith Goffinette, we're delighted to have you as a guest. And the Mr. Buck Smith of school board fame and the school administration fame, we're delighted to have you with us, Buck.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. And this is a classic Herman A. Smith family. Herman H. Smith family. Thank you very much, Mattie. And to begin our interview, to talk about this wonderful family, and we know that you're going to mention Mr. Herman in a very specific way as we get into this, but let's talk with you for a few minutes about your family genealogy, maybe the name of your mother and father, and if you can remember your mother's maiden name, we'd like to have that for our genealogical history. Would you look out into your camera and do that for us?
Would you like to know my parents' name first?
Yes.
My father, Robert Nelson Ensor, E-N-S-O-R.
E-N-S-O-R, okay.
My mother, Sarah Jane Elizabeth Pace. No, Hodges was her Pace.
Her maiden name. All right. And she became an Ensor.
That's right.
That is wonderful. And where was their home when you were born?
I was born in Bell County, where my parents grew up.
Right.
Also, their parents grew up in that same area.
That is wonderful. And Bell County, tell us where Bell County is located.
That is about 200 miles, I guess, south of Dallas.
South of Dallas.
At a little place called Belton.
At Belton, oh.
Near Belton.
Yes, that is wonderful. Now, I know that you migrated some way from Belton to Grand Prairie, Texas. In Belton, in the Belton area, where did you go to school?
Well, now, we left that area and moved to West Texas.
All right.
And I grew up mostly in West Texas.
Where in West Texas?
In Runnels County.
All right.
Just south of Abilene.
South of Abilene?
At Winters, Texas.
Oh, wonderful.
And that is where I met my husband and married.
Wonderful.
And we moved to Dallas that first year. And lived in Dallas then until I came to Grand Prairie.
All right. Now, in Winters, Texas, when you met Mr. Herman Smith, and you all married, did you live in Winters any length of time? What was he doing in Winters also?
He was farming.
He was farming. Oh, that is wonderful. All right. And you married a farmer, and then you didn't get to stay on the farm, but you moved into the Dallas area?
That's right. And he went into the fruit and vegetable business in Dallas. On the Dallas market.
All right. Now, we're going to let you rest just a minute, and we are just going to let his number one son tell a little bit about Mr. Herman Smith. Would you, Buck, recall anything you can about your father? Give us his full name and his parents' name if you can do that, and you call on Mattie if you need help, young man.
Well, his full name was Herman Hogg Smith. And I think the Hogg came from Governor Hogg family.
All right.
And his father's name was Robert, and his mother was Sarah Witherspoon. We have many Witherspoons still in this area, and I think that probably a great number of the Witherspoon family was from the Midlothian Waxahachie area in Ellis County. And on my grandfather's side of the family, we're really not quite sure when and where they came from. There seemed to be, through the years, discussions between my father and his sisters, and so forth, a lot of controversy as to whether it was Illinois or Tennessee or exactly where he came from. We're really not too sure.
But that's an exciting beginning that he finally found his way to Winters, Texas, right?
Well, my father went to Winters, Texas, I think, with a friend of his from the Dallas area, strictly to work on farms, and that's where he and my mother met, as I have been led to believe.
All right. Would you tell us, before he came to Winters, Texas, what did Mr. Herman A. do as a young man?
Well,
where was he raised? Down in Waxahachie?
He was raised in the Kaufman and Dallas and Grand Prairie area.
All right.
He lived in the far north part of Grand Prairie, which would be Wildwood Oaks area now. They had a farm out in that area at one time, but his father was basically a fruit and vegetable peddler. Peddler. And I think that he grew up in that environment, and then went into the Navy in World War I and served in the Navy, and then when he came back from the Navy, came back to the Dallas area, and that was when he and his friend Tom Jones went to West Texas, I think, to work as farmhands.
All right. Now, we would like to have the death date of Herman Hogg Smith, if you would tell us, if you remember those good dates for us.
He passed away on July the 30th. 1977.
1977. But prior to that time, he was very important in Grand Prairie. We saw him, he was a man about town. We saw him in every direction, and he always had the freshest vegetables in town, didn't he?
Yes.
All right, Bob, tell us a little bit about your remembrance of your dad as you grew up and he was doing the vegetable thing, and then you as the older son. Why you didn't it? The oldest and the only son, and the fact that you did not go into the vendor business in the vegetable department.
Well, my earliest recollections of my father was on the Dallas market. We lived in South Dallas at that time, and he was handling the selling of the produce that my uncle, who lived at Kleberg, Texas, grew. He was growing, and my father was handling the marketing end of all of his products. And during the years, we then bought a little farm out on what's now Northeast 8th Street, just across the river, and he started farming some there, and I think, as I recall, he didn't care for the farming end of it as much as he did the selling end. So he then had several different families that moved on to the place and handled the growing of vegetables, and he continued on the market for quite a number of years. Then down on East Main, he eventually had a fruit and vegetable stand on East Main, down in the area where the bank has its drive-in now, formerly the Cicero Drug area there. Then he had another place on up where the old Southland Ice House used to be, on East Main. I guess about the 400 block of East Main, probably along in that area. During the later years then, he retired numerous times, and every time he'd retire, he'd end up going to the market to get some produce for the family, for my family and Sherry and my mother and my daughter, and for neighbors. And the next thing you know, he had a truckload, and he was delivering it to the banks and selling it throughout town. So this was kind of the way that his life went. But to answer your question as to why I didn't follow in those footsteps, World War II was going, of course, when I finished high school in the spring of 1980, or 1943, excuse me.
What school was it?
That was Grand Prairie High School.
All right, okay, just wanted to get in a plug.
Graduated in the class of 1943, and I went directly into the Marine Corps and spent the war years, the remainder of the war years in the Marine Corps, and I got out and came back to Grand Prairie at the end of the war, and like many young men, I was going to set the world on fire, and I found out my matches were wet. So I went back in the Marine Corps then in 1947, in the fall of 47, with the idea of making a career of it. And I stayed in the Marine Corps then until 1969, when I retired from there, came back to Grand Prairie, and I went to work for the school district and stayed there until July last year, when I retired from the school system.
All right, now give us, the members of your family, give us Jean's full name and all of your children.
My wife, maiden name was Jean Kinley. Her father was killed in a industrial accident when she was just a little girl, and her mother came to Grand Prairie during the early war years to work at what we call then the bomber plant,
right?
Chance Vault, and she was Jean Kinley, and went to school in Grand Prairie and was known there. And my mother-in-law, Miss Ruth Blake, is known by many people. She's been here all during the years. Then we have a daughter, Karen Hamilton, who is a resident of Grand Prairie. She's assistant librarian at the high school at the present time, and her husband, Rick, is employed at Chance Vault. And they have 3 children, Brian and Todd and Melanie.
Wonderful.
That are in the Grand Prairie schools here. And I have a son, Terry, that lives in Lincoln, Nebraska with his children, Kyle and Nicole.
Wonderful. Now that gives a real good rundown of Buck Smith. That is just great. We're going to get back to you in a minute, but let's let Sherry say something about her part of the family. Sherry, growing up as a sister to Buck Smith, I know it's been an exciting life for you, but tell us about Sherry Smith Goffinet and when you graduated from Grand Prairie and all of the things about you.
Well, I started to school in Grand Prairie also and graduated from the same building I started to school in. But I graduated in 1949. Of course, Buck was already out and had already left home, so I don't have a lot of association with him through, those years. But I graduated in 1949. I married in 1950.
All right, now tell us who you married.
I married Bill Goffinet.
Okay.
He was had just come to work for Smith & Water, Architects and Engineers here in town, and Marshall Waters Sr. decided Bill needed to meet me, so he introduced us to each other. And so Bill has worked for Smith & Water, off and on, for years. Left 12 years ago, but as of today's date, he's gone back to work with Smith & Water.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And so, but anyway, we have 2 children. We have Gwen Brazelton, who is a teacher at the New Garner Elementary School. She teaches 4th grade, and she has a little girl, Teresa. And then our son, Greg.
Give her husband's name.
Okay, Mike. She met Mike at college. They were at Oklahoma Christian College in Oklahoma City, and that's where they met, and married about 12 years ago, I think 12 or 13 years ago. And they have a daughter, Teresa, that's 7.
Good.
And then our son, Greg Goffinet, is known by a lot of people here in town because he covers sports for South Grand Prairie High School. And he is married, and he has 2 children.
Right.
He has Amanda, who is 5, and Zachary, who is 10 months old.
Wonderful.
And Rhonda is his wife. She was Rhonda Zachary, and she grew up in Grand Prairie also.
All right, now, when you were in Grand Prairie, I know for a while you worked in the Grand Prairie environs. Tell us some of the places you've worked, Sherry.
Well, I've worked off and on. I didn't work for a number of years. I was a homemaker, but in 1960, well, I worked in our church for a while as church secretary. just part-time at
And that
Turnpike Church of Christ.
Okay.
And then in 1969, I went to work for the schools, for the Grand Prairie schools. And I worked in various positions there, first as an attendance coordinator, and then I went to work for Mr. Hobbs Williams as his secretary. And then we went to the administration building, I don't know, in about in the early 1970s. And anyway, I worked for the schools for about 9 years.
Are you still working, Shirley?
No, yes, I am still working.
All right.
Yes, I have. I went to work for Electrocom Automation. It actually was E-Systems when I went to work for them about 8.5 years ago.
Okay.
And so I have worked in various capacities there, but recently I've been promoted to executive secretary to a vice president. So that's where I am right now.
All right. Now, Maddie, let's get back to you and talk a little bit more about Maddie Smith, who is such an exciting lady. Do you want to tell everyone in video land your age?
I don't mind.
All right.
I'm proud that I've lived this long.
All right.
I'm 85.
85. Isn't that magnificent? You just get around like a 16-year-old.
I feel great. I feel great.
That's great. Now, Maddie, when you came to Grand Prairie, Texas, and as we all called your sweet husband, Hog, did you help him do all of this vegetable things, or did you work outside the home? What did you do?
I've been strictly a homemaker.
All right.
At 19 and 50,
All right.
I did go to work at the Erlinger Manufacturing Company.
All right.
After my family was practically grown away from home.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked there for a number of years.
Yes. Well,
And retired.
would you tell us what Erlanger's manufacturing was?
Mostly children's clothes.
Yes. Yes. It was a very exciting place to go. We hated to lose that industry in Grand Prairie, didn't we? All right. Did you ever ride around with Hog when he would go to sell the
Oh,
vegetables?
yes.
Oh, you
I
did?
I have quite a bit.
Oh, well, good. You were aiding and abetting in that wonderful business, weren't you?
I was with him a lot in his latter years, you know, when he worked with his in his car here in Grand Prairie.
All right. Would you like to tell us what a beautiful lady of 85 does nowadays to fill up her time? Tell us some of the things you're into now, would you?
Well, I have a very busy life right now.
All right.
It's my activities are many, and they're mostly related to church activities.
All right.
We have a good working program for women through our church,
Okay.
and I find a lot of things there that are of interest and very inspirational. And
Good. Are you a member of the 39ers?
yes, I am.
Oh, tell us what the 39ers means. I've seen that on the bulletin board at church and everything, and I know that I'm eligible to be a member of the 39ers, but
If you're 65, you may, or
Yes.
60 even, we'll let you be one.
yes, I should be in that, but they meet on Tuesday night, and that's the night the city council meets, and I can't come be with you. Tell us what the 39ers do.
Well, we have potluck supper,
All right.
and we carry a lot of programs each week, well, once a month. We meet the last Tuesday of the month, and at 6:30. We have potluck supper and just a lot of good association together programs, and we have plans on our program for different things, like we help with the summer youth programs through the church and things like that. We have plans, a lot of plans going regularly for trips.
Oh, you
We
do?
make trips, as together as a
group?
group.
Where are some of the places that they've carried you on these wonderful trips?
Well, down to Waxahachie or where that is.
The
down.
Gingerbread City? Oh, yes.
And I see the plays down at
Granbury?
Granbury.
Oh, yes.
And we always take in the Christmas program out at the Six Flags
Oh,
every
that's
year,
great.
which is
the
great.
Winterfest and all of the
that,
Festival of Trees. That's great. great. All right, now, before we get back to Buck or Sherry and let them talk to us a little more, I want to ask you, since you did ride around town a lot, how have you noticed the real great changes? What year did you come to Grand Prairie, Texas?
1932.
1932. That's been a long time. You came here a year after I did.
And we moved at our location now in 1950.
All right. That is great.
We've lived on Church Street since 1950.
Now, since you first moved here to the little farm area, what have you noticed mostly about the changes in Grand Prairie?
There's just been too many to even mention. It's just gone from a little village to a city,
Yes, it has.
and business-wide as well. You know.
What do you think has been had the greatest impact on the growth and everything of Grand Prairie?
Well, the plants have had its part.
Yes.
Churches and schools, and we've had a good building program here.
Okay, we're going to let you rest a minute. We're going to get back to Buck. I'd like to talk to Buck about a little bit of history, because Buck has saved our life as far as the Historical Commission and the city's concerned, because when no one else would really care for and adopt the little Jordan Height Cemetery. Tell us your title now, Buck, in that wonderful group.
Well, I'm president of the Jordan Height Family Cemetery Association.
Yes.
And our sole purpose is to perpetuate the care of that cemetery and to keep it in a reasonable manner. And
I'd like for you to look out into your camera and talk to it a little bit and give them a real exciting thing about how you resurrected that and how the people have responded to your call for that.
well, the Jordan Height Family Cemetery is located on the corner of Johnson Street and Myers Road down in the northeast sector. And it truly was at one time, I guess, a family cemetery. To my knowledge, well, I have no knowledge of any gravesite ever being sold in that cemetery. The Height family, Robert Height, was the first person who was buried there, and he was a son-in-law of the Bowles family, and most of the Grand Prairie residents either know of or have heard of the Bowles Association in that sector of the town. My grandfather and my grandmother are buried there. I'm not real sure how they come to have a plot there, but we have a family plot down there of about 8 or 10 grave sites, and I have my father is buried there, and there's a place for my mother, and I have 2 aunt and uncles that are buried there, and several cousins that would have been buried there. The cemetery went for years, I guess, with volunteer help. People maybe once a year, twice a year would gather and try to keep the cemetery. And then his family scattered, and I guess the workers just grew older than the needs of that cemetery, and it was just difficult to maintain. And Maudie Holland, who was an old, long-time Grand Prairie resident, at one time tried to get a committee or to get an association formed, and back in about 1955 finally got an association formed, but then it became somewhat dormant as she got so old that she couldn't look after it, and it kind of went downhill again. And then back several years ago, I suppose that it kind of goes with the fact that my father was getting to the age that he was, and he had a grave site there, and it began to kind of worry him a little bit, I think, that the cemetery was in the shape it was in. And that was one of my promises to him, was that I would look after that cemetery and see if I couldn't keep it in better shape. And we reactivated, and I sent out letters to all of the people that I could locate and asked them to forward it on and ask for support in the thing. And about that time, the teen jury was becoming very active in Grand Prairie, and with the assistance of some 80 or 90 people that responded to my letters with contributions and with financial assistance, I got with Judge Cameron Gray, and we worked out a program to where the teen jury and the Cemetery Association together could mutually support one another. And since that time, the teen jury has just responded remarkably well for us, and they have been keeping the cemetery grounds for us, and we in turn have managed to support them financially with the equipment and operating funds to offset the work that they're doing for us there. So it's just been a dream come true that that cemetery could be such as it is. During the sesquicentennial year and the historical portions of the endeavors in this city, we made application for that cemetery to be made a historical site, and we are pending receipt of the marker at this time. The marker has been ordered and the wording has been approved on it, and I think that within the next few months we should be getting the historical marker and installing it, and hopefully it will lend to the importance of the history and to the perpetuation of the care. Hopefully there will be someone that will be following in our footsteps that will see that that cemetery is always taken care of. And I think with it being a historical site, it certainly will create some additional interest on the part of people that will be here. The relations are fast becoming few and far between for that cemetery.
We want to thank you, Buck. We know you put in many hours on that. We also want to thank you two for contributing to our tape today. Our time is gone. It's been wonderful having you all with us. We appreciate so much the Herman Hogg Smith family, and we want to thank y'all for contributing to our tape.
Thank you.
And this is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.